Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Scotland and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel a good number of times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, a good number of different styles, but I would say this brewery are best known for their big malty dark beers, their fruity juicy sours, and in more recent times they actually have been doing a few more kind of lighter and sessionable beers which have turned out very nice as well. So it's probably fair to call this brewery a very strong all-round one these days. But the beer that we're going to have a look at today is one that I've tried before on an out and about video. It's a style that I very much enjoy and one that's been enjoying something of a mini resurgence over the next little while. So I'm looking forward to revisiting this beer and doing a proper sit-down review for you. So hopefully you guys enjoy my take on this one and hopefully it makes for an interesting review. So for this one then, we are going to head up toward Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland where I used to study chemistry a good few years ago. We're going to go to the northwest of the city to Dyce near the airport and we're going to have a look at another beer from Fierce Beer then. So this particular beer is called Beepa. It comes in at 5% ABV and as the name might suggest to you if you're a beer nerd like me, this one is a black IPA. So yeah, as I mentioned to you earlier, I have actually tried this beer before. I had it on tap when I filmed my bar visit video to Fierce Bar in Aberdeen, and so I know this one is pretty solid actually. So I'm curious to see whether it's any different and how it comes out of the can actually. But yeah, this beer was released as part of the Aldi Scottish Beer Festival a couple of weeks back, and when I saw it I just thought, well, let's have a go at this one and see what we get. I actually bought this beer, I believe, before I went up to the Fierce Bar to film, if memory serves me correctly. But yeah, this one is a pretty good beer, so looking forward to trying it for you once again here on the channel as a sit-down review. So let's crack on then and see how we go. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Fierce Beer before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Scottish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to very regular at the moment because I am back at home in the motherland of Scotland for a little while. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then once again to tell you a little bit about Fierce Beer. So Fierce Beer, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Dyce in Aberdeen to the northwest of the city, and they began life as the homebrewing experiments of David Grant, who had worked for many years in the oil industry. So he had been homebrewing since March of 2013, and after having hosted a food pairing dinner in May of 2015 where his beers received rave reviews, he decided that he wanted to kind of take his hobby further and turn professional. So David was joined in the early days by Dave McGarry, who also worked for a number of years in the oil industry, but when the oil price crashed, he used his redundancy package to put himself through a brewing course at Brew Lab in Sunderland, which, as I've mentioned before, has produced a good number of craft brewers actually. But fast forward a little bit to April of 2016, these guys moved into their brewery in the Kirkhill Industrial Estate in Dyce to the northwest of the city, right next to the airport as I mentioned earlier, and at the moment these guys can brew around 800,000 litres of beer per year. That figure may be slightly inaccurate because I think I found that figure maybe about a year or two ago, so I don't know if they've expanded that capacity since then, but they are producing quite a lot as you can see. But they started canning their beers in early 2018 and they now have their own bar on Exchequer Row in Aberdeen, which is called the Fierce Bar. You can check out my out and about video that I filmed there as well. Apparently over the next few years the plan is to move the brewery to a more central location in the city of Aberdeen and to have a big sort of brew pub and restaurant type thing, so hopefully that is something that comes to fruition. That would be very cool to see, a kind of Aberdeen city centre brewery actually. But in May of 2019 they expanded their bars and opened up a new one in Rose Street in Edinburgh, and there's also one down in Manchester in England these days as well. But they're also producing some spirits I think it's gins they've been producing. I'm not sure if there's other things there as well, but they also started a barrel-aged sour series as well, which is called Fierce by Nature. Like I mentioned earlier though, if anyone was to ask me about Fierce beer, the first things that would come to mind would be the likes of the, very big moose and stuff like this, the big malty dark barrel-aged beers. For me, this is where Fierce beer really shine. Their fruity sours have always been very good as well, but in recent times, as I said, they've been doing a few lagers and, lighter New England and West Coast IPAs and things like that, which have turned out to be very nicely. So I think it is fair to describe Fierce beer as quite a solid all-round brewery these days, but the really special beers I think still are the kind of big malty barrel-aged beasts that they do. But yeah, definitely one of the Scottish breweries that you need to check out if you haven't done so already. I know that their beers are quite widely available across Europe and further afield, so if you get the chance to try some, they come highly recommended from me. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Fierce beer for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that is it for your history section. Let's get on and have a look at the beer itself. So I'll just let you have a little quick look at the artwork on this one before we open up. As you can see, it is pretty straightforward, this one. There you can see the fierce little mental hophead guy that is their brewery symbol. When you bring it back, you can see it's a 440ml can, and it tells you on the back here, Beepa. A really weird beer style that tastes so good. A tropical hop-packed IPA brewed with black malts to give a roasty flavour to balance things off. Then it tells you a little bit on the side about the brewery, of course. But like I said to you earlier, this one was released in the very recent Aldi Scottish Beer Festival. There was also a black IPA from Stewart Brewing, which I've reviewed a few videos ago, and that one was also pretty nice actually. So it was quite cool to see that there was 2 black IPAs in this festival, because that was a style that was very popular back in about 2012, 13, 14, this kind of thing, and it does seem to be coming back in a little bit in recent times. So yeah, this beer I believe cost me somewhere in the region of like £1.50 for the can or something like that. It was pretty damn cheap, I have to say. So £1.50 is somewhere in the region of like €2 at most, so let's just say 20 Swedish kroner, and I guess $2.50 American for those of you watching over there, just so that those of you watching in different places have a little bit of a price reference. But as you can see, plain silver top on the can there, 5% black IPA. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. So yeah, curious to see what this one has in store for us. But yeah, for those of you who are a little unsure of what a black IPA actually is, it is basically an IPA with a little bit of black malt added into it, or some people have described it as basically an IPA hopped stout in some ways. So yeah, there's 2 different ways to look at it. For me, there are 2 different kinds of black IPAs. You've got the more west coasty ones, which use mainly different kinds of barley malt, but there are ones out there these days which are using a little bit of wheat and oat, and I would kind of call those the more New England type barley malts. But this one says on the can that it contains barley, wheat and oats, so stylistically and technically this one probably leans towards that New England side of things actually. So just keep that in mind when you're trying these different kinds of beer. But yeah, anyway, we've got it out of the can and into the glass now, so there we go. So as you can see, and as you would expect, this one's poured a lovely, very dark ebony rosewood colour. Before the head disappears, you can see that it's poured with about a 2/3 finger of it's almost like quite a dark mocha coloured head, this one. I'll bring that into the camera so you can see. It looks very, very nice. You can see lovely kind of nice tightly packed bubbles there, but it looks very good. That is obviously going to fade away to be a nice kind of thin foamy layer the longer that you leave it. But yeah, this beer certainly looks the part of a black IPA. You wouldn't expect anything less. A lovely dark kind of ebony rosewood colour, this one. So 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there, but I mean overall it does look very, very nice actually. So yeah, remember the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use, This determines the majority of your EBC rating. 2, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar is caramelised, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But when it comes to a black IPA, you're using black malts or carafa or something like this. That is going to be the main contributor to the lovely, very dark colour that you get out of this one. Any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in can also affect the colour of the beer, but when it comes to black IPAs, that's not something that you often have to care about with this particular style. When we shine the light through this beer, it does have a little bit of a kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi sort of coloured edge to it, but other than that, this one is pretty opaque. And when it's got wheat and oats in it, that kind of makes sense. Remember, as we always say with more New England type beers, they're the things that contribute to the opacity, the opaqueness of the beer, along with the yeast. So yeah, this one, it makes sense that it is pretty much jet black or black as night, whatever you want to say. So yeah, that's everything we need to say about the appearance. It looks the part. Let's take a closer look at the aroma then and just see how we go. So, I'm going to say this does smell really nice. Yeah, it's kind of got everything you want. Yeah, so Black IPA, as I said, is for me, it's a very interesting style. As I said earlier, you can get the New England ones, which are the more kind of wheaty, oaty and smooth ones, or you can get the barley malt leaning ones, which can either be a little bit sweeter or they can be a little bit more kind of roasty and toasty. Another style that you should keep an eye out for, incidentally, is a Cascadian Dark Ale, which I think only uses Cascade as its hop, incidentally, but very similar style. It's basically, a black IPA just with only Cascade as far as I can remember. But yeah, this one comes across really nicely, and for me this is a little bit unusual because in the aroma it actually reminds me a little bit more of a kind of straight up barley malt black IPA rather than a New England one. It actually has a little bit more of that kind of crisp and slightly sweet and toasty aroma that you would expect of a more West Coasty leaning black IPA. That's my first impression of it. This actually does have a really nicely balanced malt base to it. So yeah, I like that about this one. I don't remember picking up so much of that when I tried it in the Fierce Bar right enough, and this is one of the reasons why I still like doing sit-down reviews of beers that I've tried on tap in out and about videos. I actually always prefer to try out of the can or the bottle first and try it with a clean palate. That's my preference. But yeah, aroma-wise, that is very, very nice. So the hoppy character isn't too pungent in this one. It's got quite a nice, just soft, but slightly oily, juicy, fruity character. So let's just break this one up for you and describe what's going on. So, backbone of this beer, you get a really very kind of toasty, well-fired bread crust. You really get that sort of thing, like a really well-fired morning roll. For those of you watching in Scotland, you guys will know what that means, but a really well-fired, toasty bread crust coming out of this one. On top of that, you can get a nice kind of almost rye bready, brown bready character coming out of this one, which is quite nice. I do miss the German rye bread when I used to live over in Heidelberg. It was awesome. The German bakeries were top notch. But yeah, lovely kind of brown bready character out of this one, absolutely. And as I say, it's quite a rich brown bread, like a German rye bread. You can smell the wheat doing its job in this one though, and just smoothing that out, because normally if you've got rye bread, it would just smell a little bit more kind of grainy and things, but the wheat in this beer is definitely smoothing that out a little bit, and I dare say the oats will be doing a little bit of that too. You can smell a little bit of the smoothness and almost slightly sweet character from the oats as well, which is kind of interesting in this one. And I do want to say there's maybe a little hint of a slightly kind of chocolatey note from this one. So if we're talking chocolate, I think, it's maybe like a sort of 70% cocoa chocolate, somewhere in that kind of region. It's not, not too dark and bitter, but it still has a little touch of the sweetness left in it. So you can smell that in this beer. There is a wee bit of a chocolatey note to it, but I also get a nice kind of brown sugary note. So for me, there is a bit of a toasty brown sugary note to this, but you do get a little hint of a more oily caramelly note in this beer. So like I say, this beer for me is quite interesting because the toasty bread crusty notes and the sweet brown bread, for me, or the graininess of the brown bread, I would say, for me, those along with the more brown sugary notes, that often is more an indicator of a West Coasty type Black IPA than a New England one. The New England one is more like a straight up, the beer really leans almost all the way to the bready end of the spectrum. So yeah, this, for me, the malt base on this one is quite interesting. There are of course one or two little undertones of, like, you know, wood and a slightly nutty character to the beer, but that is those do take a bit of a back seat to things. This is more like a kind of West Coasty Black IPA for sure. But I like how this beer goes together for sure. So a thumbs up to definitely a thumbs up to Fierce Beer for this one in terms of its aroma. Let's focus on the hoppy side of the beer then. So the green component is quite reserved in this one, but it's kind of as you'd expect. I'd be curious to know what hops they've used in this beer actually. But there's certainly a wee bit of earthiness for me. Quite a smooth earthiness, I would say, but it builds a good bridge with the slightly more roasty, toasty components of the beer. There is a little bit of a floral character, and it's quite a bright floral note, but quite wet at the same time, and it's not too pungent, as I said. And for me though, the green component leans a bit more towards like a wet, freshly cut grass, and I really do like how that side of it. I really do like how that side of the beer goes together. So for me, on that note, it does get a big, it does get a little bit of a thumbs up, or a big thumbs up for sure. So the green component of this one for me is quite nice, and these are things of course that you would expect from this beer style. So let's take a look at the fruity side of things to round off before we have a taste of it. So on the fruity side of things, for me, there is a little bit of a kind of toasty, you know, you can smell the sort of toasty undertones to the fruit, but you certainly get, there's a wee touch of a sharp raisin. You do have that nice kind of juicy figgy character underneath, which I really enjoy. So I do wonder if there would be a little bit of Chinook as the bittering hop in here, or maybe a bit of Cascade as well. That's quite a common thing with black IPAs, to use Chinook as a bittering hop and then Cascade as like both as a bittering hop and as a flavor aroma hop. But I think there's a bit more to this one. Simcoe was a very popular hop to use in black IPAs, and just going by the aromas in this, I wouldn't be surprised if this is something like Cascade, Chinook, Simcoe and Mosaic. I think there's something like that in this beer, to be honest with you. So the reason I would say that is because I can certainly pick out, there's quite a nice, there is a wee, you can pick out a little touch of that kind of very juicy kind of figgy note to this. And if you put Simcoe in a black IPA, it gives you some really very bright and juicy red fruits. There is definitely a little bit of black berry in this one, and again, for me, that is something that Simcoe does in black IPAs. Simcoe's a fascinating hop. In West Coast IPAs, it gives you a big oily passion fruit. In the New England, it gives you a really soft and juicy passion fruit, but in a black IPA, it's going to give you these big, like, blackberry type notes. But for me, there's definitely a little bit of an orangey undertone to this one, like a tangerine orange, and that makes me think Mosaic. The reason I would say Mosaic rather than Amarillo is because of the earthiness that this beer has. So I think there might be a bit of Mosaic in this. I wouldn't be surprised if this is something like Mosaic, Simcoe, as I said, a bit of Chinook, and a bit of Cascade. I would not be surprised if this beer has something like that. And when it's been produced on quite a big scale, as this one has, you know, for the Aldi shops, all of those hops are fairly reasonable to get. So that's maybe something that kind of backs my my postulation there, I guess we could say, but, or my hypothesis. But yeah, whatever it is that's in this, it is really nice. Bit of orange, some nice oily black berry kind of notes, definitely a wee bit of black currant and fig in there as well, and a wee touch of sharp raisin, but definitely a wee bit of there is a wee juicy tropical note to it as well, in fairness. But yeah, I think that rounds off the aroma, to be honest. Let's put the rest of the beer in the glass and we'll have a taste of it. But as I always say, take a bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But we are going to taste this one now. So this one is the Beepa, a 5% black IPA from Fierce Beer in Dyce, to the northwest of Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Yeah, that's pretty damn solid, I have to say. A lot more roasty and toasty and bitter than I remember it being. I remember it on the tap just being a little bit smoother than this, but that, you know, that could be due to the conditioning and things like that. On the tap, I always find beers are a little bit smoother and thicker and sweeter and things like this. So that is definitely worth bearing in mind. You do get different flavours from the canned conditionings in these things, but yeah, this is pretty damn solid actually. This is like a proper old school, quite big, bitter, roasty, toasty black IPA. When they're saying they're using black malts in this, you can really tell the difference between this and one that uses something like, you know, Weyermann Carafa malt as well. The Weyermann Carafa malts from Bamberg in Germany, those, you know, they have the well-fired bread crust, but they've got a big, smooth, bready character on top of it as well. This one for me is really quite straight up and quite bitter in a lot of ways. This is a little bit more, it's interesting because you can get the smoothness out of the more modern New England type black IPA, the more bready ones, but it's certainly got the big bitter beastie characteristics that you would get from the more old school black IPAs when this style first appeared on the scene. So yeah, I think Fierce have done quite well with this to capture both the kind of the old school black IPAs and show you something as well from the more modern side of things. The other first impression I have of this one on the taste is that it's not quite as sweet as the Aroma would have you believe, but we'll see how it develops. We will see how it develops. Yeah, that is it is really quite nice, this one. It takes, you know, it's with these big dark beers like this, you always get that kind of impact flavour, and it takes a bit of time for your mouth to kind of just adjust and mellow out. But I like this one, and it's very cheap as well for what it is, so give it a go and see what you think. But yeah, let's break down the flavour of this one for you and describe it a wee bit more in depth. So straight away across the middle of your palate, then you can feel that roasty, toasty black malt backbone that goes right across the middle of your palate and across the back of your palate. On top of that, you've got the nice, you have got the very big, you can feel a little bit of that really toasty, well-fired bread crust there. So there is a wee bit of that element there. We're still talking back third and middle third of your palate. So yeah, backbone of the beer, straight up, harsh, you know, well-fired black malt in there. On top of that, you can feel the more kind of bread crusty elements. And then you do have a sort of thin layer of a kind of wholemeal, brown bready sort of thing to this one. And again, I really like how that goes together. So yeah. Yeah. It's the bready notes. I think the more that you drink of this one, the more that it kind of, the more that the bready side of the flavour just kind of thickens out a little bit, and it does actually gain a little bit of sweetness. So you do get a wee bit more of that almost like German rye bready sweetness out of this beer the further forward that you go. So we'll focus on the middle third of your palate for just now then. So we said roasty, toasty, black malt backbone, a little bit of a more kind of thick, well-fired bread crust, then a sort of thinner layer of a kind of brown bready character as well. So again, I really like how I do really like how that goes together. So on top of that, you've got a more kind of, you do have more of a kind of smooth, yeah, you do get a nice little bit of a kind of smooth brown bready character in there, as I say, and you can feel the wheat sort of thickening it out a little bit more the further you go into the aftertaste. And then in the dead centre of your palate, there is a wee bit of a kind of circle in there where you can really feel the oaty smoothness out of this one. But in this one, you know, the sort of wheaty thickness and the oaty smoothness kind of blend together, to be honest with you. I'm trying to figure out whether we have actually got any brown sugar in this beer. I think maybe when you take this beer in initially, you do get some sweeter elements out of it. So if you go to the dead centre of your palate and just follow the middle of your tongue back toward the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you will get a little bit of a chocolatey note out of it, like an 80-90% cocoa chocolate. That is quite minimal though. I think it's the black malt and the bread crust that really take the lead here. But when you first take the liquid in, there is an element of a brown sugary sweetness out of this one, and it is actually like quite an oily caramel, but not overly, you know, it's not overly thick and caramelised, if that makes sense. So you do get quite a sweet, lightly oily caramelly note in the dead centre of your palate, but that's a very, very small circle in the dead centre of your tongue. There are potentially some kind of light woody undertones to this beer towards the front of that middle third of your palate. But yeah, I think, to be honest, that describes everything that's going on in the middle third of the palate. So yeah, quite interesting. That's where the biggest complexity in the beer is. But let's focus on the back third of your palate then. So border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you get a little bit of that kind of bread crusty build up again there. You get that nice kind of you can just feel that it all builds up there, and then the back third of the palate is kind of similar. So really toasty, well-fired grains, more harsh and bitter towards the back of the palate. You can feel the thick brown bready notes in there, again a bit more grainy, and that graininess gets bigger towards the back of the palate. You can feel the wheaty layer on top of that. There is a wee bit of that wheaty bitiness and spiciness there. The oats don't really come back onto the back third of the palate though. Then on top of all that, you've got the yeasty notes to the beer. So again, it's quite a thick, as we say, a thick yeasty. It is a kind of thick yeasty. It is quite like a thick, dense, doughy, bready character, this one, and it does have one or two little woody and crackery elements to it, and just a little touch of a kind of peppery spice or something there, which is interesting. So yeah, all of that sits on top of the kind of wheaty layer on the back third of your palate. But when you come forward from the back third of your palate, you can feel the flavours a little bit taller. Then as you go further forward, it just condenses down a wee bit, and as you go into the middle third of your palate, the flavours are a bit more squashed together. But yeah, the way that this beer goes together, I think, is very, very nice. So on the hoppy side of things then, so back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness there for sure. And as you move further forward, the earthiness does creep forward a little bit and smoothen out. But as you push towards the front corners of the palate, you've got a nice kind of spicy, you do have a nice sort of spicy floral aromaticity comes out of this one. So I do wonder, maybe it could be a bit of Centennial. A little bit of Columbus that's in this, actually. That's what I was meaning, not Centennial. Centennial would be lemony. I think a little bit of Columbus could be in this, or it could just be Chinook, because you do get one or two little piney resiny notes underneath, which is interesting, and that would be another sign of Chinook. So yeah, it does get a little bit of a kind of piney resinous sort of thing as you come further forward. Then round the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and more sort of grassy, and the grassiness does have a wee touch of zestiness to it as well, which is interesting. But yeah, the green component for me, bit piney, resinous, a little bit earthy, and as I say, just a wee touch grassy. I think the grassiness takes a back seat to other things. But yeah, let's focus on the front third of your palate and the fruity side of the beer. So, the fruity side of this beer is actually quite nice, and in a way it's quite slick and then almost a little touch oily as well. So yeah, I like how that goes together on this one. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a nice little bit of a kind of bready build up there, nice little bit of bread crust and a kind of grainy bread. Then the base of the front third of your palate is a more toasty, well-fired bread crusty note again. Then sitting on top of that, you get that nice oily, slick bubble where the juicy fruity esters just kind of roll their way out of the beer. But yeah, you can feel the dryness of this beer. This beer does get quite dry and bitter the further you go into the aftertaste. But let's focus on the fruity components itself then. So yeah, when you take this beer in, I would say the fruits come across a little bit different to what I expected from the aroma. I will say that. But yeah, you do get a little touch of a raisiny sharpness with this one. You can feel that in there, but that quickly gives way to a more kind of dry, tropically fruity character actually. So on the back half of that front third of your palate, it's almost like you've got a kind of dried, slightly mango-y, apricot-y kind of thing. You do get a little bit of a juicy kind of figgy, red fruity note underneath, but it is actually quite like a sort of dried apricot-y thing sitting on top of like a really toasty, well-fired bread, and that for me is quite unusual in a black IPA. That's not something that you're going to come across every day. Then as you move toward the front half, as you move towards the kind of front half of the front third of your palate, it's a little bit more it is a little bit more kind of orangey and tangerine in that sense. So you can feel there's a little bit more of that oily orangey tangerine, and it's almost got a little bit of a drier character on top of it. It's definitely sweeter on the front half of that front third of your palate than it is behind it. So yeah, the fruity side of this beer is quite interesting, and there is, I was picking up these figgy and blackberry-ish type notes in this. Going by the flavour, I'm really second guessing myself on the hop. I do think a bit mosaic in this. I would still say mosaic. maybe a little bit of Simcoe and a bit of and a little bit. I think it could be Chinook or Columbus that's in this, but I'm doubting myself over the Cascade. I'm really having to think about that. So I would be curious to know what the hop bill on this one is, but whatever it is, it works quite nicely, and I do like the sort of bridge that this beer builds between the more kind of toasty West Coasty IPAs and also the more kind of bready New England one. So a really interesting beer here from Fierce. But let's round off this review with a look at the mouthfeel then. So overall, I'd say this beer is kind of toward the bottom end of mid-bodied. The carbonation does have a degree of crispness, but in some ways it's a little bit difficult to distinguish between that and, you know, distinguish between it being crisp and, you know, the mouthfeel being really, you know, light and wet in a sense. And that, so I do like how that goes together in this one. This is quite interesting that way, but it comes across as a very clean beer in a lot of ways. So yeah, there's quite a few things that you can think about with this one for sure. So a nice kind of quite clean and slick beer in a lot of ways, but quite a dry and bitter one in other ways. In terms of IBUs, I wouldn't be surprised if this beer is pushing, you know, the 70 IBU, like 60, 70 IBU mark, potentially even a bit more. It's a bit difficult to distinguish in this one between the roasty, toasty black malts and the kind of hoppy side of things. I think it all kind of blends into one, and you can count all of it as IBU, but I don't know if it says the IBUs on this one. No, it doesn't. So yeah, I'd guess about 70-ish IBUs with this beer, but the malty backbone has a bit of toastiness to it, quite a bit of smoothness, and it's also got a wee touch of sweetness to it as well. And then you've also, you know, you've got just a little touch of a juicy, fruity character in there. So yeah, I do like how this one goes together for sure. So it gets a thumbs up from me, and well done to Fierce for producing a black IPA. This was the when I tried it in the Out and About video, this was the very first black IPA I'd had from them, and I enjoyed it. So yeah, let's leave it there for this one. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Fierce Beer, and do of course give me some black IPA recommendations, because it is a style that I very much enjoy, but still a little bit difficult to find them. So would be curious to hear your thoughts on this. One of the best ones I would recommend for you guys to try would be the black malts and body salts from Total. Wonderful, wonderful beer actually. Quite an old school one that, but definitely worth trying. Thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out theirs, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. This one was the Beepa Black IPA, 5% ABV from Fierce Beer in Dyce, just to the northwest of Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland. Slàinte, skål, cheers.